now, but to keep our international focus. And it's my great pleasure to introduce George Kanaan, who is the Chief Executive Officer of London's Arab Bankers Association, which is the professional body for Arab banks in London and those who work with Arab banks in London or who would like to. George didn't start as a banker. He trained and practiced as an engineer, and then he changed tracks and moved into finance. After studying at Harvard Business School, he began his banking career with Citibank in New York, and apart from a brief period with First Chicago, he spent all of his banking career with Citibank, where his achievements included managing the London presence of Samba, Saudi American bank, which was a bank in which Citibank at that time held a 40% stake in a management contract. And specifically, George established and managed Samba's London branch and its investment company, SCMI, between 1987 and 1992. He then left Samba to work for a very senior member of the Saudi royal family, creating what we today would call a family office that had presences in Riyadh, London, and Geneva. And more recently, he's been advising former clients and colleagues while also developing and strengthening the Arab Bankers Association in London, of which he became chief executive in 2009. Before making way for George, I must declare a personal interest. George is a good friend of mine, and I can tell you he knows everyone in London. I mean, not just finance people, he knows everybody. So there's no better person to put you in the picture about London banking, finance, and frankly everything else than George Kanaan. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. It's also great to be with you this morning in what promises to be a very valuable get-together organized with great professionalism by Amdeya and his distinguished chairman, Walid Al-Abdin. It's exciting to be part of a wide-ranging discussion on matters important to banking worldwide and to which our region needs to pay particular attention and urgently. These are not easy topics. We need to think about them in depth and to ensure that their implementation is not consistent and judicious. We are not going to be satisfied. It's not going to be satisfactory at all to just say words. I'm here to speak about not the region, but a sub-region of the region, because of particular history and politics, developed in an unusual fashion. It's now grown to a substantial size. This is the Arab bank community in London I'm speaking about, and gained greatly in importance. In fact, in 2008, when nobody would lend a penny in London to real estate developers or buyers for that matter, the Arab banks were there to do the job. Our community in London lies in a way at the intersection of East and West. It's very similar to the Turkish experience, Western technology and know-how with Middle Eastern culture and tradition. London has been the international center for Arab banking since Arab banks first started to spread their wings in the 70s, and a bit earlier. In fact, the history of Arab banking goes back to the 1950s, when the Kuwait Investment Board, which later became the Kuwait Investment Office, known very well as the very large and very distinguished KIO, took premises inside the Bank of England. That's in 1953. The United Bank of Kuwait, UBK, a consortium of leading Kuwaiti banks, began operations in 1966. Today, London is home to some 25 Arab banks, which are either subsidiaries or branches of Middle Eastern banks or UK incorporated banks owned by Middle Eastern shareholders. In addition, there is present a large number of Arab-related family offices, funds managers, venture capitalists, consultants, etc. Do not forget that most international banks, if not all, run their Middle East operations out of London and employ a large number of Arab staff in that particular function. The banks in my association include the largest bank Kuwait, NBK, the largest bank in Qatar, QNB, the largest banks in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, FAB and EMBD, and the second, used to be the first, biggest banks in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh Bank. We also have two of the big four Lebanese banks and the biggest banks in Egypt and Jordan. Libyan interest is represented not only by Bank ABC, but also by a British Arab Commercial Bank. We have a Moroccan bank, BMCE. This is a far more significant presence of Arab banking than in Paris, any other European city, or for that matter, any financial center. Why has this happened? Firstly, London has been a financial center for 2 centuries, perhaps longer, I don't know. To be a financial center, let me just remind you very quickly, you have to have the backdrop of a powerful economy, you have to be governed by a highly developed legal system, have access to highly qualified pool of professional talent, lawyers, accountants, quantity surveyors, things are not even known outside London, quantity surveyors, valuers, etc., etc. You also have to enjoy long-term political, social, and legislative stability. You must have access these days to superb technology. All of that stuff is available to anybody who wants to visit to be in London. Soon, I hope this will all be available in Istanbul. London is aided by something else. It's aided by language and by being very open, a very open society and a very open city. It's essential to have those characteristics, and they take time to build. Let me say a few words about Brexit. It's potentially of great impact on London and the UK. If you remember, the referendum took place in 2016. Britain formally left the EU on the 31st of January 2020, and there was a further transitional period in which existing arrangements stayed in place. So, in fact, Britain left the EU only about 10 months ago. The first thing to say about life outside the EU is that, contrary to what many people said, the sky hasn't fallen in. At least not until now. Yeah, things may get worse, who knows. Businesses continue to function, people go about their daily lives, and as the COVID pandemic recedes, or maybe not, the City of London and Canary Wharf are becoming more busy. I've just been there around the city and around Canary Wharf, and life is beginning to look pretty normal. There is, however, one has to have the caveat that in the shadow of the pandemic, nothing is going to be the same as it was before. Certainly, the whole concept of hybrid work will change life, will change cities. So London remains prosperous and dynamic, as I can witness. We have not seen, more importantly to the point, we have not seen any Arab banks leave London as a result of Brexit. The bank that they established and ran in London, the Saudi American Bank and SCMI, did leave London in 2016. It was supposed to be related to Brexit. It actually wasn't. It was strategic reasoning that really was unacceptable. It was really short-sighted and a very short-sighted and blinkered decision that led to them leaving London. But other than that, there has been no significant presence, no significant change in the presence of Arab banks in London, and it's expected, in fact, to grow now. If Libya returns to some sort of normalcy, Iraq, etc., we'll see banks come from all those countries. So what are we doing at the Arab Bank Association? What are we grappling with? One is real estate, believe it or not. Arab banks and their private clients have been investing in London real estate for decades, and they continue to do so at an extraordinarily fast rate. In fact, we held our annual real estate seminar only last week. We do once a year a big event on that. And among the key points made was the one that the market, which is supposed to have reacted to two significant events, Brexit and the pandemic, reacted, in fact, by prices rising, and demand, in fact, right now, far outstrips supply. Other issues that we are focused on is strengthening compliance and anti-financial crime procedures. It's no secret, but it gives me no pleasure to say it, that London is being used by some rather unsavory characters as a place to invest or deposit the proceeds of corrupt practices. Of course, London is not alone in this. But what we are seeing in London is a move to stronger regulation and in fact, stronger enforcement of regulations related to financial crime. We are playing a big role in this. We organize events and training sessions for our members on all sorts of regulatory and financial crime issues. But we are also now greatly involved in the creation of a European chapter of the MENA Financial Crime Compliance Group. This was founded in the Middle East 5 years ago and has been doing excellent work with banks throughout the region. Another principal activity of ours in this respect is to get the banks en masse in the same room with a big team from the FCA to review all sorts of matters of importance to the FCA. Now, there are big issues that require collective responses. Think of, everybody says these days, ESG. The E in ESG. Now, how are banks in our part of the world going to take on board regulations relating to climate change? Now, after all, their economic success is predicated on the continued use of fossil fuels. So how are you going to tell them to stop that stuff or not use it anymore? Think of the position faced by their branches in London. The last collective session we had between the banks and the PRA, the head of the team at the PRA would speak of nothing else but climate change. So everybody wants to do the right thing in this respect, and very obviously it's not always possible to do the right thing. Or difficult anyway. The Arab bank community in London extends far beyond licensed banks, subsidiaries and branches. London boasts law firms, accountants, quantity surveyors, real estate valuers. I've spoken of those before. They are second to none in their expertise and who have deep relationships with Middle Eastern institutions and individuals. In fact, they have many, many Arab staff. Many of these firms, therefore, are members of our association. Facilitating the dialogue between the banks and the service providers, really important to do, is an important part of what the association does. Beyond our focus on Arab banks, Arab financial institutions and their ecosystem, we would like to extend at this forum an invitation to our Turkish banking colleagues to join us. It will make our association much stronger. We share with our Turkish colleagues a common culture, common objectives, and common challenges. Turkish and Arab banks have not been close enough to each other. They have not. I hope that what's happening here will bring them together and that our association can contribute to that function. In conclusion, I'd like to thank my good friend Walid for this invitation. I look forward to being part of the audience, to learning more about banking and finance in Turkey and the region. And I hope, and finally, that with the travel restrictions easing and COVID receding, and I think it will recede in England too, that we see you in London, visiting us and seeing how we as a community remain vibrant, profitable, expanding, and ready to welcome you specifically. Thank you.